for us to make change. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But it's these young people out here, and these young people have always been the people who've been the source of change. And so I'm proud to see what they're doing. Now we need to get some of these things turned into policy. And if we can get some things turned into policy, I believe we can make some significant changes.
Absolutely. Now talk to me about, since you said that, so you know that, I want the people to understand what oppression means, or being marginalized. Would you be able to, I know you talk to me, what your perspective is on that?
Well, my perspective is this, we're talking about National Parents Union. So I would say this, almost every parent I've ever ran into wants their kid to get a good education. And so the question I ask them about is why get a good education, or what is a good education? And it depends. It varies from some people in Boston who may say going to Yale or Harvard, or going to MIT. The other parents say, I just want my kids to graduate. But we normally want to do that because it provides them economic opportunity. And when you've been denied access to economic opportunity, that means when January, February, March, April, May, June, July comes, and they're going to come every month for the rest of your life, that you don't have access to the funds necessary in order to take care of the bills and the responsibility. And that puts you in a position of being oppressed because you have to constantly seek other people to help you. You don't have a dental plan. You don't have a medical plan. You don't have access to proper credit. You don't have access to opportunity that is going to open up the doors for you and your family to generational wealth. Yes. And as a result of it, when you've been marginalized and treated as a second-class citizen for so long, you become oppressed. It makes it very difficult, which is why parents fight so hard to make sure their kids have the best proper schools, not just because of the education, but because of the responsibilities that it provides for you. And I think we as a people in this country, I said to the guy the other day, we were slaves longer than we've been free. So, yes. That puts us in a situation that makes it very difficult for us to be able to provide for our families and our kids, from some of the basic necessities like food and shelter to taking care of things or medical. And when you deny people access to education, you deny them access to opportunity. And in doing that, you create generations upon generations that have not been exposed to or experienced the things that are necessary in order to move their families forward. And you've been treated as a second-class citizen. Your vote doesn't count. Your schools don't count. Your situation, you have to deal with what goes on with, I'm 50 years old, and this is one of the first times I've ever really been nervous about being pulled over by a police officer. And many of my coaches and my friends are police officers, but there's a threat in the field, like anything can happen to me. Yes. Because, the state of this nation right now. So that marginalization is a mental state as well. And it's trauma, and it produces trauma in children, it produces trauma in adults, and it makes it very difficult to not deal with the issues that are prevalent in our community, like high blood pressure, sugar diabetes, things of that nature.
Right. And I honestly believe that we have some form of we're born into post-traumatic stress. We are born. But you mentioned something about slavery. So let's go back a little bit about, and let's talk about emancipation. I mentioned, you mentioned about slavery, and I'm just thinking, we have to go back to see where we're going. And so talk to me about, we discuss, we have people, our leaders like Booker T. Washington. What is your perspective on what happened then as far as what he was doing and what he was trying to convey to his peers, and a result of what's going on now? I guess, did I say that good? You understand?
I think I get what you're saying, Kelly. First of all, I would go back and say this, that Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee Institute and the things that he did based on the five-finger movement. So he went to a conference and did what was called the Atlanta Compromise. He said, in all things purely social, we can be as separate as the five fingers. But when it comes to the good of the nation, we must come together like a fist. And segregationists use that in order to say that Black and white people don't need to be together. Black people can have their lane, we can have our lane. Booker T. Washington said it's cool. And Booker T. Washington and Tuskegee began to educate African Americans on trades because he understood the importance of economic viability. So he wanted you to have an education that would allow you to take care of your kids, to take care of your family, to be able to be self-sufficient, and also be able to give back to your community. So I was a W.B. Du Bois fan, but when I began to look at the Booker T. Washington 4-point plan, what he was basically saying is education that will allow you to provide for your family, education will allow you to take care of yourself, education will allow you to give back, and a job, skill, or a trade that will put you in a situation that you will be self-sufficient and you don't need other people. Many people today talk about the importance of education for economic viability, and I get it. And Booker T. Washington, although he was animately supported by a lot of philanthropists like the Rockefellers and things of that nature, what he also did is privately, because he knew the face that he had to put in front of the nation, he gave money to a lot of predominantly African-American causes in order to make sure kids got a proper education. And that's something he really doesn't get a lot of credit for. Whereas W.B. Du Bois, which is his nemesis, they also wrote a book together called the Negro in America. But he always said education, education, education. Booker T. Washington said education and economics. He didn't necessarily say we need to pursue a degree at Harvard or we need to pursue a degree at Yale, as W.B. Du Bois did, one of the first Black graduates of Harvard. But he was talking about economic viability, and privately, he gave a significant amount of money in order to start up African-American schools so that the kids could have economic viability by teaching them trades. And today in 2020, one of the biggest things that are going on in public schools, especially inner city, is CTE programs. So welding, auto mechanics, cosmetology, auto body, car engines, manufacturing, bricklaying, industrial trades. There are a lot of kids who are really coming out of school so they don't have to, deal with that debt and come out with a license, and they're able to take care of themselves and their families.
Culinary. And what's strange is that, I'm from Akron, and I remember here in Akron, now they have what's available, medical assistance, but in rural areas like Barberton, Copley, they have LPN license. That's a big salary change. That's a big difference. They don't have that here though. Why? Why don't they have that here accessible for our kids? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get you. I would say one or two things, Kelly, and this is just my opinion on it. I think that parents as advocates, that's why I'm glad we're on this radio, your show today. Parents are the biggest advocates for their kids possible. And when you have a group of parents who understand how the educational system works, it provides them access. When you know the rules of the game, it's hard to lose. So our parents have not necessarily been equipped with the rules of the game. I know my mom didn't know it. What I found out right now is the boards of education have more power than most superintendents. So if you have parents who understand what I call the 3 Ps, first, I'm gonna call you on the phone. Then I'm gonna put it on paper. Then I'm gonna show up in person. And if you take care of those 3 things and go to a board meeting, those parents are then able to become advocates for their students and their families and their children and their neighborhoods in order to make viable change. But I always tell them it's 3 Ps. Call them on the phone. Hey, this is Dr. Womack. I'm calling about an issue, etc. Follow up with it on paper. I talked to you today about this situation going on for the LPN program versus the medical assistant program. Can we talk about this? Remember, I called you on the phone. Guess what? Schedule a meeting. I'm going to show up so we can talk about this. In the end, if things don't work out the way it's supposed to, you do what we see going on in the country right now. You show up at the board. We need to protest. I'm here in person like, yo, I don't agree with what you have going on here, especially when I can go 30 minutes down the road or 15 minutes around the corner and they have programs that my kids need, but you're not providing them for them and I'm paying taxes. Why is that? And I think we just have to train parents. That's why I like your show, allow parents to be trained to become advocates for their kids, like you've always been an advocate for yours.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like you said, and then you can also be on the board. You don't need anything but a high school. All you need to be is registered and have a high school diploma, and you can be on the board. I didn't know that when I coming through. I didn't know. All I was, like you said, I was that number. I was that mom that just, I was married for 10 years and then I got a divorce and then I was alone and I was by myself and I was just trying to make it. I was just trying to get my kids educated, in a good school and keep moving. You know what I'm saying? I know all the details. I thought once you take them to school, they're supposed to handle, all of that. But no, you have to be engaged. And that's why we're here today. just looking back on everything. Go ahead.
Well, I had a guy by the name of Dr. Robert Jackson, and I'll never forget his quote, and he's still here today. He used to say, Sandy, and this is how I used to say it, Sandy, in a world of fools, there are even rules to make dumb men seem wise. And I was like, what? He said, in a world of fools, there are even rules to make the dumbest man seem wise. You'd be a fool not to learn these rules and also rise. And I didn't understand it at the time. But as I started getting older and I started becoming involved in more and more circles of people from business community to housing community to criminal justice to medical fields, I began to understand the rules of the game. And you began to ask the right questions, because when you ask the right questions, you can get the right answers. And I thought how important it was for us to educate our parents and our community on asking the right question and then knowing what steps to follow through with in order to make it happen. And that's why when you go back to the conversation about slavery, for 300 years, you couldn't teach 90% of the Black population to read, to write, to do math. That was intentional, because if you're a slave and you learn to read or you learn to do mathematics, if you learn to do certain things with contracts, it put you in a situation where you could use the master's tool to tear down the master's house. They didn't want that to happen. So yeah, that was the whole justice. Slavery was economic and it was brutal, and it was one of the worst things that could ever happen to any people. Like 3/5 of the people that were on those boats never even made it here, Kelly. 60% of the Black population never even made it from Africa to the United States or the West Indies. They died. So the African-American people that live here today are some of the strongest and most resilient in the world, because you're a part of that 2 out of 5 people that got on that boat that made it.
That made it over. I know.
Right. Your ancestors made it. Your ancestors, so you're some of the strongest. So for us to see what's going on in our community to a certain extent right now is very difficult for me, because I teach African-American studies. And to know, our people don't know their history in many cases, that can impact you in a tremendous way. I mean, that's biblical. In the book of Hosea, my people destroyed for lack of knowledge. They don't know it, they don't want it, so they will be destroyed. We need to know who we are as a people, and not just slavery. Like the light bulb was invented by a guy by the name of Lewis Latimer. That's an African-American, but you keep teaching me Thomas Edison. Right. The refrigerator that you have in your house, that's an invention by an African-American. The guy's name is J.A. Standard. The air conditioner that I need to cut on in my house, that's Frederick McKinley Jones, also an African-American. We just found out about Catherine Jones, who was the computer who designed the formula in order to get Neil Armstrong and everybody to the, to a space and orbit. Nobody was even talking about that. And those were Black people doing positive things. And they were teaching us about George Washington Carver and the peanut.
Right. Because they want to keep us oppressed. They want to keep us, dumb and not knowing our history. So luckily we do have more resources now. And I always tell people like Booker T. Washington, look him up. Look what he did. He developed 5,000 schools. That's a lot of schools. And I don't want to forget, I want to make sure everybody knows about your books. So if you can, real quick, repeat, what are your books that you have available?
Okay, well, maybe if I can show them. So this is one. It's called Creating Successful Urban Schools. I wrote that about 2 years ago, and it's about turning around high poverty schools based on the experiences that I had at Hartford Middle School and my dissertation research, interviewing principals and case studies to find out how did you turn these schools around and finding common themes that went on. Another book I wrote about 7 years ago talking about police was this book. It's called Even the Best of Plans Go Astray. And it was based on a run-in that I had with the police department as an educator, and just talking about my life story. It's called Even the Best of Plans Go Astray. So those are the two most recent. And my dissertation is out there. You can pull that up online. It's called Sanctions, Exploring the Perceptions of Urban School Principals on No Child Left Behind after successfully turning around a low-performing school. So we look into what it takes to turn around, as we say, low-performing schools. But I've been writing and speaking and talking quite a bit for a long time now. So just been blessed and happy to have this opportunity to use this media platform to talk about it.
Right. And you are available now to go and travel and speak, right?
That's correct. I think the gentleman Daniel has information about my website. It's called
Okay.
urbanschooleducation.com. And last year I was in Portland, Oregon, speaking with Dr. Linda Darling Hammond. Previously, I've been in Portland I used to go to Portland every year for what's called a Teaching with Purpose conference, but I presented in Oakland, California, Atlanta, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina, all over Ohio. So I just truly been blessed. Education has been a blessing for me, and it's opened up doors that I never thought that I would see. Just growing up on Wildwood and Work and Nome and on the north side. Like I said, my dad did 17 years in the penitentiary. So I never thought that I would be able to do some of the things I'm able to do, but more importantly, that my children would be able to do the things that they do. So education provided me some choices, some chances, and some options, whereas a lot of my friends had choices, chances, and consequences. So praise God for that.
Praise God, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that as well. So before I finish we still have time, but I always tell the audience how grateful and how thankful I am that they tune in and that they listen to what's going on with my half an hour program. Even if they come in for 10, 15, 20 minutes, I don't know what they do. I don't look at the analytics, but what I do understand is that you do come. And so I'm just so excited. I'm just grateful. So I just always want to make sure I say that because I want the people to know that. Now, I wanted to talk about, there was a gentleman, and I got this on my notes. His name was Charlie Cobb. He wrote the essay on freedom schools. Did you ever hear anything about this gentleman back in the late 50s, early 60s?
So I am not familiar with Charlie Cobb. What I am familiar with is the concept of freedom schools, as well as Saturday school programs and things that people in the African American community have done in order to make sure their kids had a quality education. I knew the Black Panther Party started Saturday school programs and free lunch programs and free breakfast programs where kids could be educated on the contributions that Black people made to this country. And one of the things that I say, Kelly, is this. We can't just teach our kids this. Everybody needs to know this, because my grandmother said, listen, she said, Sandy, what's the difference between a lie and the truth? And I said,
oh, it's freezing out.
Yeah, she never went beyond 8th grade. And she said half the story. She said the difference between a lie and the truth is normally just half the story. And what happens in schools, we often get half the story. So what I know about freedom schools that they did here, even in Canton, they had schools for Saturday programs. They were teaching these kids their own history. So they knew about Mansa Musa. They knew about the University of Timbuktu and colleges and universities. They knew about the contributions of Nubians before you had Egyptians. They knew these things so that therefore they would have a positive sense of self and look at themselves in a different light. So I'm not as familiar with the author that you speak about, but I am familiar with some of the Saturday school and the freedom school programs, because if we only teach this to our own kids, first of all, we have to start with ourselves, but everybody needs to know it, because if you look at the media every day, we athletes, entertainers, and constantly on the crime watch, but never talking about the multiple positive things that we have done as a people. And we all need to get that, because as grandma said, if you're telling me half the story, you lying.
That's it. You're lying. But that's what he did. Charlie Cobb, people, if you have an opportunity, look him up. He was one of the individuals, he was the initiator of freedom schools, independent schools. And
I'm writing him down right now.
Okay, yeah, he was the one that kind of like pushed that concept, each one teach one, back in the 50s and the 60s. And it's really awesome because how he developed it was like they had schools and churches and basements, all everywhere. And that's how they was able to really start to teach our children. Because like you said, after emancipation, we were like wanting to come together and teach our kids education, but we had to start from somewhere. We didn't know, we didn't have the information that we needed. We at our school, check this out. So at our school, I work at a high school, in our hallway, we had a big sign, and the sign it was like these kids, they were on a track, and it showed it showed all the handicaps basically of how you can't get ahead, and all of those was all the. Did you ever see this? We're like all the
We
black
saw that
kids.
video. It's called the $100 race. So if your
Yes.
parents weren't, or they didn't graduate, or you the first in your family to graduate, or you didn't have this and that. Yeah, we have a video called $100 race. And so everybody else kept moving forward, and most of the poor kids and even the black were so far behind. It's like you got to run twice as far and twice as fast even to catch up with stuff that didn't have nothing to do with you.
Nothing to do with you. It's just that they were born into a whole different lifestyle bracket, and they I think so many people don't understand when they're trying to explain to people about white privilege. There's so many people that do not understand that. They like the what was that, Christopher Columbus. I'm so, you know, his statue's being torn down. People need to understand why. You know, I spoke with a lady the other day.
Kelly, if I come to your house and knock on your door and find out you home, I ain't discovered nothing, but this is your house.
That's
if you
it.
come to the United States and you find Native Americans here, you ain't discovered nothing, but there's already some people here, which means they had already discovered it. Half the story. You keep telling us this lie. So
half the story. Do you understand this man? If people look him up, he was one of the initiators of sex trafficking of 9, 10, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, little girls. I mean, this man was a beast, and people need to look him up and understand why his statue was torn down and why people were so angry that even how do you praise something and this, you don't know the true history about who this individual is.
And you know, that's what's called colonialism. So anytime you come over and take over a country, what the British found out a long time ago, and what the Portuguese found out before the British, and the Dutch found out before them too, is that once you take over a country, you become the leader of that country. You take the language, you take their religion, you take their sense of self. You start teaching your history, you start teaching your religion, you start teaching your sense of self, so that therefore the mindset, once you control the mind, you don't have to worry about the body, because generation after generation will begin to understand and learn things that may be untrue. And so it becomes internalized. And you're right about Columbus. There's a lot of negativity. I just did an article the other day on my Facebook talking about the Indian Removal Act. That was a law that was legislated, that we're going to take all this land, move all these people, and you know, they're less than 1% of the population right now. And there were Indians in New York, all the way down to Florida, all the way over to California, or excuse me, Native Americans, all the way up to the state of Washington, all of the Dakotas. This was their country. And right now, Native Americans make up less than 1% of the entire population. And in 1830, Congress passed a law called the Indian Removal Act and took all their land west of the Mississippi. And many of them died in the Trail of Tears, to the point that we recognize this was legislated, this was law. Just like slavery at one point was legislated, it was law. So there's a lot of things that we can do collectively as a country to change that. I believe a lot of it starts with education, a lot of it starts with advocacy, and then I think it's going to take the youth in order to make it happen. So there's so much more to learn, and it's so many things. Policy, right? You can't do it without policy. If it ain't on paper, it don't exist.
It don't exist. That's right. Oh my gosh. Woo! This was fast. I got to have you back on, and I definitely have to have your wife on as well. Maybe y'all can come on together. This was packed with so much information. I want tell the people how they can follow you, how they can find you, what information you have for them. So
you can find me at Sandy Womack, Dr. Sandy Womack Jr. on LinkedIn. That's one way to find me. You can find me at Sandy Womack Jr. on Facebook. My company is on there, Ohio Education and Prevention Association. That's OEPA LLC on Facebook. And then my website is www.urbanschooleducation.com. Any one of those three vehicles are ways that you can get in contact with me for speeches, presentations, workshops. I do a lot with equity, history of marginalization, white privilege, things of that nature. But most importantly, try to show people how to come together. Because Kelly, I really believe it's 5 things that make everybody. It's your exposure, your encounters, your experiences, your environments, and your examples. And because we are so separate and segregated as a country, many people don't have exposure, examples, and encounters of other people, whether they be LGBTQ, whether they be white, whether they be black, whether they be, and because you don't have those exposures, examples, encounters, you don't know. So you form these opinions. And the less a man knows, the more he thinks he knows.
Right.
And as a result of it, it impacts expectations. So, you know, those are the type of workshops and presentations that I do. And for the most part, I just really try to change the educational outcomes of the kids that we serve, because education has made a tremendous difference in my life. I never thought my name would be Dr. Nothing. You know, I didn't even know what sugar diabetes was. I thought I thought sugar was diabetes. I didn't know. You know, my mom said diabetes. I was like, what the heck is diabetes? Because I thought it's sugar, just vocabulary stuff I didn't know. And so it made a difference in my life, Kelly. So I thank you for having me on here. Definitely, we can get Dr. Womack in, the first Dr. Womack. Believe me, I won't be talking that much. I'll be sitting here like this.
It's all
Right.
good. That's right.
You're
That's
right.
right. Well, I can't wait for her. Now, you said she has a PhD. Tell me, what is it in?
Her PhD is in curriculum and instruction. She's actually working with the Akron Public Schools right now as their AVID coordinator and working with the Korean technical education programs after being at Stark State College for 15 years as an admissions counselor and student success coach. So she just got into the Akron Public Schools, but her PhD is in curriculum and instruction.
Awesome. Okay, awesome. Please send her my love. And I can't wait to have you guys back on. I'm already got in my mind, I want you guys on like in about another week. So thank you so much. God bless you. Thanks everybody for watching. And I see everyone today. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Thank you very much.